Welcome to the Trigger One Talk podcast, where we have uncensored conversations, we exchange information, and we provide a lot of resources for the viewers and the listeners of this international podcast. We are streaming on all the major platforms. You can find us anywhere that you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can also watch these interviews in two places, Spotify and our YouTube channel, which is called Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. I'm your fire medic CEO, host, LP. We got the lovely, the intelligent, brilliant, the baby mama back in the building, Miss Simone A, Nofel, our resident epigeneticist, behavioral analyst, Jill of all trades, human of all trades. That's what I'm going to call you, the human of all trades. You know, Simone, we're doing this part 6 on our ancestral and generational traumas, and we're going to be talking about pregnancy and conscious parenting with a bit of an emphasis on DV, domestic violence. Because I sent you this article that I want to share with the audience, and I want your brilliance and your scientific dialogue to accompany me as I gear us towards these conversations without conversation. Because, as my friend Loyalty always says, you should always have conversations without confrontation. That doesn't mean that you can't disagree. We just have blunt, honest conversations. We exchange information. These conversations are uncensored. So if you have anyone that's under the age of 18, we just say parental or caregiver advisory is actually want. We want you to have these conversations with your young folks because they're having these conversations, whether you're present or not. So it's just like kids say foul language and maybe do some foul things outside of their parents' eyesight and earshot because we're just humans. We all have done things and had experiences as young folks. And sometimes that leadership from that parent, that caregiver, can be the difference between literally life and death or the quality of life. I bring this up because you're pregnant. You're looking so lovely. I see the Instagram post that you put with your family, and you all are in Mexico and just living well. That move was one of the best things that I think I've seen with you in the short time that I've known you. You're just glowing. I want to just give a quick disclaimer to the audience. If you're triggered at any point during this podcast, and I mean at any point and you need immediate help, please call 911. That's what is going to start all of the first responders to show up. Police, fire, EMS. If you don't have an immediate need, we had a bunch of resources in the show notes. We got a couple of new numbers in there for domestic violence, sexual-based offenses, trafficking. If you have substance abuse issues, whether it's alcohol or drugs, we have Al-Anon, AA, and NA in that list of resources. We also cover missing person case at the end of each episode. I'll talk about that at the end. This is a very interesting case that Mrs. LP and I have been talking about and working on, doing some research on. That being said, pregnancy and conscious parenting. How do you define those from an epigenetical point of view?
Yes. So I guess the first part, within pregnancy, before I jump into like my definition, I think the biggest thing that we should all as a collective acknowledge is that pregnancy isn't a medical condition. Although in our current society in modern times, we look at it like that, it's not the case, right? And I think for me, this pregnancy is so different than my firstborn's pregnancy in that it is so simple. And it is like I'm just going about life as usual. I mean, of course, there's certain things that I have incorporated into my routine or my daily habits. But besides that, it's just normal, And so to think of pregnancy like that, I think is a beautiful thing. And it helps introduce some of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. And so pregnancy really is just this beautiful time, a sacred time where we are one with God, with source, with universe, whatever you believe in, this higher power that we as women are the most connected to source when we are co-creating with source, co-creating with God to bring a new human to this planet. And that, they say 9 months, is really like 10 months of this period of growth and transformation. Is really just allowing the vessel, this new vessel, for a new spirit to come to this earth and help bring forth what is meant to be here for us all. And with the conscious parenting side of it, it's really that once we become mothers and fathers, that we are so self-aware that we are able to own our own triggers, own our own desires, own everything for what it is, so that we aren't passing down toxic cycles or toxic behaviors to our children. And of course, we all make mistakes, we all mess up and stumble. But again, with that self-awareness, we're able to say, hey, sorry, apologize to our kids, acknowledge what we did, where we messed up, and then move forward. I think that's really what life is all about, is just like, we're going to have the ebbs and flows. We're going to have times of darkness and times of light. And when we're able to say, hey, this is the reality, and then keep pushing forward, that's when the magic happens.
When you think about domestic violence and conscious parenting, is there a correlation from an epigenetic point of view, or any research that you've done when you were in school or learning your discipline? What type of things did you all talk about in regards to those two topics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much. And if you've been with us for a while and you've heard some of our talk about the generational patterning and the ancestral lineage that comes into play with all of this, it goes right into this domestic violence concept and how it influences our parenting. And so typically throughout different generations, the exposure to violence or exposure to abusive behaviors looks different, right? Maybe 80 years ago, maybe it was suffering and poverty and famine. And then that brought about maybe addiction to different substances for those children who endured that time where their parents were going through famine and poverty. And so then, maybe when they grew up, their adaptation was to cope with substances. And then the children of those people, maybe they suffered from emotional neglect and things like that. So it shows up differently as generations move along, and then it's just up to us to be able to change the course. And where the epigenetics part comes in is really being self-responsible, like taking agency over those patterns and saying, okay, I'm no longer going to be a victim to this circumstance, and I'm going to rewrite the narrative. I'm going to actually do things to rewire the neural pathways in my brain so that I am no longer almost comfortable with this type of toxicity. Because that's what kind of happens, is we get comfortable in suffering. That's something that we're used to as a human species. And it's actually more confronting, liberating ourselves from that and taking responsibility for our lives and for our health and happiness.
Simone, one of the things that always intrigues me about your brilliance is you have a very straightforward, bluntly honest approach to these topics. And you bring about such simplicity to it. It's not like we're doing a dissertation. I really appreciate your points of view, because sometimes the conversation gets diluted. Let's say, so Mrs. LP and I have been having these Gen Z versus Gen X conversations lately. And so we're Gen X, she's in her mid 40s, I'm in my early 50s, and there's a 7-year gap between us. A lot of times we'll talk about the things that we'll see with some of these young folks. So let's say work ethic. We know that a lot of these young folks now, when it comes to work, hey, they're like, what? I'm not going to burn myself out for a job. I'm going to do my 9 to 5. If I need to take a break, I'm taking a break. Where our generation was like, hey, you work your ass up to the bone. It's like, hey, you have to deal with whatever later on. You got a job to do. And those conversations are part of why I'm bringing this up, because as parents, I say us Gen Xers really spoiled our kids to a point where they don't have a lot of common sense in terms of some of these things that we're talking about. Yeah, it's okay for you to be an advocate for yourself, whether it's in the workplace, but the work ethic still is important to have. It's just like when we talk about who's the breadwinner, or do you even think that having a job is important? Because some people now, especially with technology, they look at, I don't have to have a college degree. It's true. I don't have to be some big shot or whatever. I can still live my life I can make a living being an influencer. I can make my living going viral. I can do all kinds of things. And sometimes those things lead to domestic violence situations in relationships and in home, because whether it's emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, all of these different things. When we're talking about parenting, how do you as a parent deal with some of the nuances with these Gen Zers, that because we have kids and they're growing up and they're seeing this stuff and they're experiencing these things, and it causes problems at home. The parents, my hair is getting more and more white as I get older, and it wasn't because I'm getting older, it was because I was being stressed out by my kids dealing with this conscious parenting, because I want to be woke. Let's say.
Yeah, I think, there's such beauty in all of the differences between generations. And actually, last summer, I saw this breakdown. It was a chart, and it had all of the generations and then like their personality traits or the commonalities that each generation holds. And I think that shows a lot with human evolution. And I think to a certain degree, it's all needed with balance, right? And so when you're talking about work ethic, like that will never go away. Like in every generation, there needs to be this work ethic, this standard of having a increased work ethic. And at the same time, because of how the world is changing, and we were just in this long period of the technology age, and so the fact that these teenagers and young adults now are wanting to utilize technology for their advantage, I think is a beautiful thing. And that doesn't mean that they should be lazy pieces of shit just sitting around and mooching off their parents. However, like I said, finding that balance between working hard at what you want to do, what you're passionate about, and then utilizing technology for your wellness, for your advantage, for whatever. And I think when it comes to parenting, like I'm not a parent of a Gen Z, or it'll be a whole nother generation. I don't know what my son and my children's generation will be called or is called. Just kind of being close in age to the Gen Zers, or my nieces and nephews on my husband's side, they are all Gen Zers, and kind of watching them as they grow and develop into adulthood is very interesting, because I think that each generation of parents has to, at least to a certain extent, be empathetic to the new ways of becoming an adult, right? Because becoming an adult for you as a Gen Xer was way different than for me becoming an adult as a millennial. And so I think just getting curious about what the teenager or young adult needs is like the first step in learning how to differentiate, like, and how to show up as a parent. Like, what do you need? What is out there? Like, what are you consuming? Whether it's, physical consumption, mental consumption, spiritual consumption. Like, what are you consuming on a daily basis that I can help you navigate through? Because that's really what it comes down to, is this navigation where in modern society, in the Western culture, there's no rites of passage, right? Like, there's no significance from becoming a boy to a man in our culture right now, and there's no celebration from being a girl to becoming a woman. And so the lack of having this rites of passage, I think, really becomes detrimental for parents and how we parent and how we navigate our children becoming adults. And so if we can find that sweet spot, that period where we can kind of initiate them into adulthood without the influences of social media or just any external means, really, to be able to get to the core of this initiation, I think would help so much, to be able to, one, give them the skills that they need, like the work ethic, like you're talking about, the survival skills, like whatever it is, like this real kind of tough situations that if they're able to master that, it's going to be inevitable that they will succeed or at least flourish to some degree in their adulthood. And so I think, as parents, we can help our children by creating situations where they have to be on their own, where they have to use their critical thinking, and they can't rely on, oh, what did my friend do in this time? Or, what did Sue and Bob and Joe do? It's like, what do I need to do for myself? And to be able to either create those situations for our children or find a mentor or somebody that they can go through that with, I think is really vital.
Urine makes some of the funniest shit that I've seen posted by you. Actually, in a sense, it's not funny. What's funny is your responses to it. What's not funny is people stepping to you like they have the right to tell you how to deal with your pregnancy, how to handle being a parent who's homeschooling her child. I want you to talk about, and you're missing some memes that you should, I'm telling you, the reels that you make are just phenomenal, right? Like, we still got to talk about that. I want you to talk about some of these things that really burn your ass and how you have dealt with them so cool and laid back. And it's hilarious also, but it's important because this feeds into the conversation that we're talking about with ancestral and generational traumas, referring to pregnancy and conscious parenting. The mic is yours.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, there's been a few different comments, that I receive, and I feel like I've experienced this throughout my whole life, just kind of doing things differently or questioning things and being vocal about the questions that I have. So when I'm approached with, or approached by Karens or Chads or whatever you want to say, typically I try to stay in a neutral place where my old self, like I say, like the old self of me would have just like snapped off, popped off. And now I've come to a place where I try to kind of be neutral in listening and like receiving the information. So yeah, I think over the years, how I deal with Karens and Chads has evolved. And I now try and take a neutral stance when I'm listening, so that I can actually receive what they're saying, like receive what they're saying in its bareness, right? And like in its truth. And then once I receive it, usually that's when my emotions will kick in and then I'll give a response. But it's a delayed response, so it's more regulated. And, typically I like to share with them my perception of their message before I respond. So for example, with a woman who was telling me that I should be wearing a bra, right? She was, in my opinion, giving unsolicited recommendations for how I should dress, how I should present myself. And one of the responses that I gave to her was, maybe it's the opportunity for you to reflect on your own insecurities, on your own body image, right? And that's kind of how I approach it with a lot of things, like even with my pregnancy. And I've heard a lot of different people either reach out to me, again, unsolicited advice, or maybe just in conversation, and they think, that their opinion is worthy of being shared, which it is all, like we all can share our opinions. And typically my response is like, I'm glad that worked for you, or I'm glad that works for other women. That's not the path that I'm taking, and just being very direct and clear with people, because I think for the most part, people who give unsolicited advice are trying to help, right? I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, like, okay, they're coming from maybe a good place. And so to have a response that's very neutral or blunt and clear helps them realize, oh, like maybe I spoke out of turn, or, oh, like maybe that wasn't necessary for me to say, instead of me just like popping off, cussing them out and like leaving. And so I try to leave these people with some type of thought or perspective that they can ruminate on. And for me, depending on what it is, I can usually shake that conversation within a few hours or even sometimes minutes. But I want to leave them with a perspective or thought that they're going to be thinking about for days. They're like, oh, like I try to tell Simone this and this and that, and it kind of sits with them. Because for people who are like that, it takes somebody like me to shake them up a bit, because typically if they're willing to say these things to you or to other people, it's because they're used to not getting a rebuttal back. They're used to not getting confronted or being confronted over these different types of things. And so a Karen is going to always be a Karen until she's met with somebody who's like, hey, you're being a Karen, and even in that, it might not really change anything, but at least they'll maybe think twice before they say certain things to certain people.
I'm glad you bring this up, because when we look at these Karens and Chads or Karens and Kens, I think a lot of times, especially if you're a melanated person like we are, it doesn't always come off as somebody coming to you with wisdom, with compassion, this, that, and the third. It's more of a, I'm telling you something because I'm putting you in your place. I'm telling you something because, I don't believe that you have the civility to know better. I don't think that you have the upbringing to do better. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. And so when I look at these viral clips about these Karens and Kens, whether they're talking about correcting your pregnancy lifestyle, whether they're talking about your parenting lifestyle, because, we see how you can't even discipline your kids in a public area anymore. And I'm not talking about beating the hell out of them or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, nowadays, I've seen videos where you can't even say something to your kid. And I'm not talking about like you're being loud and boisterous or you're all up in the kid's personal space. People have so much gall to want to tell you what's best for you in your family. And these situations end up being either where they get into a physical altercation or verbal altercation with that other person. Law enforcement sometimes is utilized, and that can get ugly just real quick, and nobody wants that, really. I think for what we're talking about right now, I want to focus specifically with you with the pregnancy issue, because when I look at these videos and I listen to the things that you talk about, I listen to how you talk about eating better foods, more vegetables, drinking raw milk, not wearing a bra. Why that is important to you not to do that. When you talk about nursing, all of these things, and I look at you and I say, you know what? You look damn good and damn healthy. So whatever you're doing, please keep doing it, because that baby is growing by leaps and bounds, and you look phenomenal. You don't look like you're struggling. You don't look like you're having a hard time. You're not talking about, I got these substance abuse issues. I got this alcoholism. I'm huffing, snorting, I'm sniffing, I'm injecting, I'm doing all this stuff. I'm eating a bunch of junk food and all that. I'm having the baby blues. You're not talking about these things affecting you. And no pregnancy is 100% flawless, just like life. So there are days, I'm sure, when some days are better than others. But as a whole, when we're talking about pregnancy and conscious parenting, one of the things that I wanted you to touch on is, what are some of the daily things that you do as a pregnant mom to not only just deal with that shit, like what's your daily schedule? Like, how do you and maintain the sense of calmness in spite of all of these negative things that are thrown at you?
Yeah. I mean, let's just give that disclaimer that it's not always calm, right? I do have those days where I'm like, nobody talks to me, nobody even look at me, don't even breathe near me. But
you know what I say? Because the one post you put on there, you was like, look, y'all don't see my room right now, but I'm just telling y'all, it ain't all that. But let me go ahead and finish.
Yeah, I mean, and it's true, because the majority of the time it is sunshine and rainbows over here, but there are times where it's like, we're in the dungeon, and that's okay, and that's how life is supposed to be. But yeah, a lot of the things that you mentioned, early on, is like the big piece of the difference between my pregnancy this time and my pregnancy with my son are those things that you mentioned: the hydration, the active lifestyle, and the foods that I'm consuming. And one thing that I really want to highlight here with that active lifestyle, and I saw a post on this the other day that I truly resonated with, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And how they were saying, like, the healthiest people in the world that are in these locations called the blue zones. If you guys aren't familiar with the blue zone, there's a documentary on it. I don't agree with everything they say, but check it out. It's worth checking out. And these blue zones are where there are the largest concentration of centurions. That means that people who live over 100 years old. And in these communities, the people aren't going to CrossFit, they aren't lifting weights, they aren't running marathons, but their daily lifestyle just happens to be active, meaning they're not driving in cars, so they're walking everywhere they're going. Maybe they're gardening, they're getting their hands dirty, or they're in the fields pulling or plucking olives from the trees somewhere in Italy. Or this notion of having an active lifestyle, I think today, because of how our society is set up, people think that means you have to hit the gym and you have to at least go to the gym for an hour and bust out your cardio or your weightlifting, your strength training, and that's all beautiful if you're doing that because you have to, right? Like maybe you're at a 9 to 5 where you're sitting in a chair all day, and then like maybe you don't have time to have an active lifestyle for the majority of your day, and so you have to go to the gym. But what I've realized with this pregnancy is that because I'm here living in the town that I'm living in Mexico, it's like a small fishing town. I'm biking everywhere. I'm walking everywhere, and it's like a constant thing. It's like multiple times a day. Like I don't have like a tracker where I'm tracking this, but I would assume that on average, 50% of my day is moving, like or even more than 50%, where I'm walking or biking or, playing sports with my son and things like this. And so when we can kind of adapt our lives so that we are walking more and sitting less, that in itself can just be the change that you need to become well in whatever aspect of your life. And for me in this pregnancy, it's not only the activeness, like I'm eating and I'm consuming things that are alive and are vibrant and they're not processed and dead. And, I'm exploring with beef liver and I'm exploring with raw milk and raw dairy, things that aren't pasteurized, because unfortunately, when milk or, any dairy product is pasteurized, it's taking out all of the good bacteria. And so you're missing out on all of those amazing nutrients. And so, with my first pregnancy, I was taking my prenatals and I was still eating kind of junk food, fast food, processed foods, but I was taking my prenatals, right? So that was my thing, like, oh, I was good. Now I'm almost into my 3rd trimester. I haven't been taking prenatals at all, and I'm focusing on what is actually bioavailable in the foods that I'm eating. And so I strive to eat the rainbow in color every day. And if I know yesterday I missed something blue, then I'm going to make sure I eat blueberries today. And things like that, where I'm just being way more conscious about what I'm consuming. And even like the mental consumption that I was speaking about earlier. With this pregnancy, the calmness and the tranquility that I'm experiencing has a lot to do with what's on my feed in comparison to 5 years ago in the pregnancy with my firstborn, where I was looking at trash, celebrity gossip and all these different things, political things. And now my feed is all empowerment, spiritual, things that are uplifting and that resonate with the experience that I want for myself and my baby. And so if you look at me in pictures with my first pregnancy, with my firstborn, you look at me and look at the pictures, you see my face is so swollen and plump and blemishes everywhere. And even my arms were bigger, and not that weight necessarily means anything in pregnancy, right? We women, yeah. we have to grow, we have to expand to carry our babies in a healthy way. And it's just about the excessiveness. You just look at the side-by-side comparison, like in my pictures, and it's really mind-blowing how different my face looks, how different my body looks. And even with that, they say with your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and beyond babies that your body grows bigger quicker, and because your body's used to it, knows what to do, knows how to expand already. So even with that fact that I'm smaller than my skin itself is healthier. And really our skin is a reflection of what's going on in our gut, in our intestine. And so I was consuming processed food and junk food and things that were dead. And so that's what my face looked like back then. Now I'm consuming, local organic fruits. And even if it's not organic, it's still, it's grown right here in my backyard per se. And, I'm consuming things that I know where it's coming from, and my face reflects that. And so, I think there's so much to be said about my daily lifestyle, the activeness, what I'm eating. A huge part is my devotional time. I take time almost every day to be still, to embrace the silence, and to connect with my body and connect with my baby, connect with God. And that wasn't something that I did consistently with my other pregnancies. And so I feel like, you have to think of yourself in this holistic way, right? The body, the mind, the spirit are all connected. And so even if there's a day where I'm like, oh, I laid around all day and I really didn't do much, then it means that I'm going to make up for it the next day, and kind of just having this balance where if I'm not hitting all three areas, body, mind, and spirit each day, then I'm going to make up for it the next day. And just continuing on like that, I think that my schedule per se isn't the same every day because we live such a free lifestyle. But I am taking those mental notes, like what am I doing or what did I not do? What can I do better the next day? Because I really believe in stacking wins. It's kind of like our family things, like we stack wins, and the more wins that we stack, that means that we have daily win, right? And then the next day it's game on. It's a clean slate. It's not like, oh, I won yesterday, so I don't have to do shit today. Like, no, we're going to stack wins again. We're going to win the next day. And if you keep winning and winning each day, then you're going to have a winning month, and you're going to have a winning year, and then you have a winning life. So stacking wins, I think, is really important. Mm-hmm. And not just settling for what you did yesterday, what you did last year, and keep showing up for yourself and showing up for your family.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. We're sponsored by Spotify for Podcasters. We're produced by my company, Penton, Consulting Solutions, LLC, and Firemedic CEO host, LP. We got our beloved applied epigeneticist, behavior analyst, Simone Nofel, who has a master's in education. I want you to put on your behavioral analyst hat because I want to share two articles with you, and I'll post these in the show notes also. This one comes from the Alabama Council on Human Relations, and it is, the website is achr.com. And the article is entitled Conscious Discipline Parenting Classes. It says discipline is not something you do to children. It is something that you develop with them. And that's a quote by Dr. Becky Bailey. She says conscious discipline, or CD, so if you hear me say CD, I'm talking about conscious discipline, is a trauma-informed social and emotional learning tool that ACHR uses in their child development programs, including both Head Start and Early Head Start. And the reason I bring this up is because you and I talked about homeschooling, and you talk a lot about that in your social media profile. So we're going to get into that. Parents are their first child's or children's first and foremost important teacher. Children will go to their parents and do what they do. If you like to clean, most likely your little one will too. That's why it's important for parents and teachers to work together to help children learn and to reach their greatest potential. That's why the children learn skills. We send home information to the parents so they'll understand why a child is blowing up things like a balloon and releasing. And so they go into a lot of these different things. They talk about how CD provides first adults ways to learn new skills and behaviors to help them feel safe, connected, and empowered. Adults then can create a positive environment for the children, families, and communities served. Teachers learn to create a healthy school family in their classrooms. A healthy school family helps children feel safe physically and emotionally, secure and connected, so the classroom becomes a supportive place to learn. And they say conscious discipline teaches children to manage their emotions, behavior, and body movement when they are faced with a situation that is tough to handle. In addition, it allows them to do that while staying focused and paying attention. Children learn how to figure out that they need to calm themselves down when they get upset. They learn to be flexible when expectations change, and they can resist giving into frustrated outbursts. What do you think about that piece?
First off, I love the quote from the beginning. I'm like, I gotta steal that. You gotta send that to me so I can share it with my husband. I love that. I think a lot of what was just read really resonates with me, especially the piece that you touched on, where it read something about if we like it ourselves, if we're doing it ourselves, it's more likely that our kid will do it. So I think the example they gave was if you like to clean, then your kids will like to clean. And it's like whenever I'm in the consulting space or I'm working with other parents, the first thing that I say is like, don't teach your kids what I'm about to say. Like first master it for yourself, and then you can introduce it to your children. because I think it just doesn't work like that. Like, how can we have expectations for our kids if we're not going to do it ourselves? And so with that conscious discipline piece, I think is really important. You know, one of the things that also stuck out when you were reading was about creating a safe space. Like, I think so many of us, either in my generation and above, and just all around in human society, I think a lot of people can relate to this idea of their home environment not being a safe space, that they couldn't go to their maybe one parent or maybe both parents. They couldn't go to them and be like, hey, this shit just happened and I just reacted like this, or I just did this, and this was the result, because we're too afraid of what our parents' reaction is going to be. And so if we have that safe space with our children, that they know, like, oh, like, I fucked up and I can go tell mom about this and she's not going to beat my ass and she's going to help me work through it, like, that is so monumental for development, one. And also that just the bonding and the connection, because a huge thing that I talk about when it comes to our spiritual well-being. So remember I was saying, like, everything is connected, our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual well-being. And a huge piece of a spiritual well-being is a sense of belonging. And so if you don't have a safe space at home, then your sense of belonging isn't going to be there. So then where are you going to look to? You're going to look to your peers, and maybe that's not the best thing, or you're going to look somewhere else for comfort and support, and it might not be the best for you. And so if we can create that sense of belonging for our children, to feel safe, to feel connected, then I think that's the best thing that we can do. And so, I think the article also talked about the emotional regulation piece. So again, as parents, we have to do that for ourselves first. We can't expect our children to be regulated and to not be tantruming if we are having our adult tantrums. Like, we can't expect that. So yeah, I like the article a lot.
The second article I'm going to send you, and I'll share it on the screen real quick, is from a podcast. She has a very, very interesting show note that she posted for her episode 23 about conscious parenting after DV. She says, if you follow me for a while, you may remember that I am a domestic violence survivor. Now, these are her words. While my bruises weren't physical, I endured 6 years of emotional and financial abuse throughout my early 20s by my first boyfriend. The abuse left an indelible impact on my soul. For years, I thought I deserved it, that I wasn't good enough, skinny enough, pretty enough. I was depressed, and my self-esteem was so low that I believed him when he said I wouldn't meet anyone else. Thankfully, during this dark period in my life, I didn't have any children, but as a child, I did witness domestic violence in my home. This is why it was so important for me to cover this topic. It's so personal to me and so many others, and ripples throughout or through generations if we don't notice and stop the cycle. Now that I'm a parent, I can't imagine my daughter seeing some of these things I saw when I was younger. Parenting after domestic violence requires us to heal our trauma, but there's two. On this latest episode of Parenting Decolonized podcast, I chop it up with Melanie Gross, a domestic violence survivor and single mom who turned into a DV life coach and consultant, and they discuss the warning signs with DV, tips on how to help your children heal through their trauma as they work with healing their own, and why conscious parenting helps open the doors of communication between you and your children so you can help openly discuss their feelings, because they're not one-cell amoebas, folks. Kids are living, breathing human beings. They're just little adults. That open communication is super important, especially for Black families, as Black women are 3 times as likely as white women and 2 times as likely as other women of color to experience intimate partner violence, or IPV. These are just the incidents reported because, as it's well known, many don't come forward. It's past time that we sit and talk about our stories and even be believed when we tell our story. She just gives a few tips. She says, talk, open the doors to communication, model and communicate what a healthy relationship looks like, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship. And the third thing she says is show them what it feels like for someone you love to treat you with respect. And fourth and finally, she says, work on healing your own trauma. Seek therapy or counseling to help you rebuild your identity outside of an abusive relationship. You also learn to find your voice again and learn how to have healthy boundaries. Now, before you get into it, I want you to put a pin in it because I know you got a lot to add to it. I know. I want you to talk about homeschooling in reference to the previous part, because you're homeschooling.
Yeah. Wow, this is like, this could be a really deep rabbit hole, but I'll keep it simple.
The mic is yours.
Thank you. Yeah. So I homeschool. I homeschool my child. He is, oh my God, I almost said 3. He's 4. His birthday was yesterday. You know, there was a lot of resistance from people around us, like our family, our close family, in doing so. Like my husband has 2 sisters, and they're both in the education system. One's a teacher, one's a principal. You know, my sister, she has her kids in the public school system. So we are, from what I know, the first in both of our lineages that are doing things differently when it comes to schooling. And I've always known since before I even was married, since before I was even, you know, considering having children, that I knew that if I was going to have children, they were going to be homeschooled. I've always known that. Early in my career as a behavior analyst, actually at that time I was just a behavior technician. Okay. I worked with a lot of families that were homeschooling their children. So as a behavior technician, I was supporting the behavior analyst, and I was going in the homes. I was working, you know, at one point there was a family that I was working with 40 hours a week in just that one home. They had two children, and they were both homeschooled. So I was exposed to the kind of the culture of homeschooling pretty early on, around like 20, 21 years old. And I saw the beauty of it, and not just for children on the spectrum, right? I saw the freedom that it gave families. I saw the support and the resources that were out there for even typically developing children. And so I was hooked in the beginning. You know, and I told my then fiance, like, oh, you know, kids and and homeschooling, and he was on board right away. Okay. And I think I'll speak for myself. I know for me, a big part of it was freedom, right? To be free, to be able to give them the resources and the education that I thought was better than what I received growing up in the public school systems. And, you know, you know how I am, just to be frank, I think private schools and these other types of schools that are different than public are pretty much the same. Like there's still some type of system that you have to conform to. And, you know, you can kind of say that is the same for homeschooling, right? Like our kids would then typically have to conform to what our idea of schooling is. And so there's so much nuance here in this conversation with homeschooling. Each family's dynamic looks different. The way that I've been schooling my first child might be completely different than the way I'm schooling my second child. And why is that? Because each person is so unique. The style of learning that they need is so different. And their personalities is a huge factor. And under this umbrella of homeschooling, there's so many different categories, right? And so I consider most of what we do is unschooling. And unschooling basically means that we're not following a curriculum. We are following our child's passions and their preferences. And there's only a few times, I'd say maybe like a small percentage of our schooling that is contrived, where I'm like, hey, like, do you want to do Spanish lessons today, right? Like we're living in a Spanish speaking country. And if you want to talk to your friends, like, you're going to have to learn Spanish. And if I ask them, what was that?
I said, yeah, you're going to have to learn Spanish, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and again, with this unschooling approach, it's not forced. You know, even though I know he needs to learn Spanish, I'm not saying sit at this computer, take your lessons, or have this tutor. Like it's on a day, like Tuesdays and Thursdays are usually the days that he will do Spanish, and we give him that option. We'll say, hey, do you want to do Spanish now, or do you want to do math now? And then most of the time he'll pick math because that's his thing. But then we give him another option later in the day, and we keep going back to these options because, again, we want learning to be fun. We want learning to be something that is not adversive, which for a lot of children it is, because it is forced. And so to take out the element of force and, to follow his passion. So maybe he's like, no, I don't want to learn Spanish, right? Because he thinks it's just this program that we have on our computers. But then, okay, well, maybe he's like, oh, I want to do math. And guess what? The whole time we're doing math, I'm going to be saying these numbers in Spanish. So he's getting into lessons even though it's not like the contrived situation that he didn't want to do. And so, yeah, I think that's a part of it, right? Is like the freedom, because in a classroom, it can't be individualized. Like one teacher can't have an individualized approach to each child because there's 20, 30 kids in a classroom. Whereas with my son, and you know, even if I have 4 or 5 kids, it's like I'm still able to devote a different style to each child. And you know, there's so much nuance to this. Like I said, even being in a different country, like every day when we go out our house is a learning opportunity, is a language lesson, right? We could be at a restaurant ordering food and me and his father are speaking in Spanish, and mostly me, I'll say mostly me, speaking in Spanish, and he's listening, right? And he's able to acquire some of this information of like, oh, how do we say, can I have the check? Or how do we say, I want some water? And all of these things. And so my perspective of homeschooling and unschooling is like, life is the classroom. It doesn't have to be at the dinner table doing workbooks, following a curriculum that's thousands of dollars. It could be just lived experiences, going out into the community, meeting other people that are different than you. Even like financial literacy, right? Like that's something that's not even taught in public school. But if your child, like every day, if we decide we're going to take the colectivo, which is like something similar to a taxi, you know, he's the one who's paying them. Oh, you gave them 40 pesos, but it only cost 30 pesos. So how much did you get back? That's subtraction. You know, he's learning these things, financial literacy, math, all these things by just living his life. And I truly believe that to really create this space of wellness for our children, we can do that by having them at home and by doing life with them, right? And like that one article said, is like we are learning and growing with them. We are developing our own discipline by parenting and by going through these experiences with our children. And so, yeah, I think, you know, for me, going through the public school system and similar to a lot of people, you know, like our physical health wasn't a priority. We got 15 minutes of recess a day. Like my kid's out there hours, you know, average 4 or 5 hours a day he's outside. And, you know, we've talked about like the importance of nature, you know, before, and it's like these things you can't access if you're in 4 walls, no windows, no fresh air, fluorescent lights. Like these things aren't meant for our biology to flourish. And so when we take them out of those situations and we can kind of course correct what's going on, it's really important. And I think one thing that I want to leave everybody with in this realm of homeschooling, and probably the most important thing, if you're thinking about homeschooling or you're just starting your homeschooling journey, or if you're like, what the fuck is this chick talking about? Go through the process that is called deschooling. Deschooling is when we are unlearning all the things that we have ever known to be education, to be schooling, and starting with a blank canvas, and then going into this of like, okay, now what is meant for me? What is meant for my kid? What is meant for our family? Because if we just go with what we know school to be and try to replicate that in the home, you're going to get the same results. And so slightly the same results. And so to go through that deschooling process really is to unlearn what we've always known to be true for school, and, you know, showing up differently in how we are our children's teachers.
You're such an educator, because I'm writing down all these terms: unschooling, I know about emotional regulation, deschooling, stacking wins. I like that. Active lifestyle, the blue zone, rainbow and color. I hadn't heard of that. I heard of it a little bit. I'm sorry, I take that back. I didn't understand the full spectrum of it, you know, no pun intended. When you are having these conversations with other people, do you get the same kind of response? Like, man, you really are a great educator.
I would say the majority of the time, yes. There are, I think the other portion is not bad. It's just more people who are like, I can't do it. I could never do it. And, or like, my kids could never do it. Things like that. Like, that would be the other response that I get.
The last thing I want you to touch on is that article that I read about the conscious parenting after domestic violence. What are your thoughts about it?
Oh man, that resonated with me a lot and really hit home. You know, everything that she was saying about that she was grateful that she went through her healing process before she had kids is so amazing. A lot of us carry so much baggage from our childhood, from our ancestral things that we don't even realize that we're carrying that aren't ours. And so when we're able to like peel back those layers and confront what's there before we step into parenthood it's just an amazing opportunity for us and for our children that are going to come from us. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one thing that really stood out for me in the article was talking about like rewriting your identity. Because I think a lot of people, and I've gone through this too, like when we've been a victim and then become a survivor of a certain situation that still plays, it's like a record that still plays in our head, right? And in our minds. And if we don't bring that record to a stop, take that needle off and be like, nope, you're not playing anymore, then the cycle will continue and it'll continue. And then you'll have kids and it'll continue for them. And so, you know, rewriting your identity means so much. And I think this is so true even for situations that aren't traumatic. But if you ever want to change courses or, you know, maybe show up differently as a person in your relationship or change careers, like it's an identity crisis per se. Like you've known yourself to be this certain thing for so long, and to even remotely think that it's going to change can bring about anxiety, right? And so when we take the initiative to rewrite our identity, we can do that again and again and again as much as we need to do. And so for somebody like me who grew up in a home that there was domestic violence, you know, there was the physical, there was the emotional, psychological. It wasn't directly to me, but I witnessed it. Maybe it was for me, like emotionally a little bit. And, you know, to be able to say, I am not going to have that happen to me. I'm not going to, you know, step into a relationship where it's like this. Takes a lot of courage, right? Because it's something that you're not used to. And there's something that I heard a few years ago that I say time and time again when I'm talking about breaking generational patterns or breaking cycles, is that when a child endures something or they witness something from their parents, and only one or two results can happen. Either they're going to completely imitate what happened with their parents, or they're going to go in the opposite direction of the pendulum and they're going to do, you know, the complete opposite. So either the complete same or the complete opposite. And we talked about this a little bit before, and, you know, I grew up with one other sister. And so we were under the same house, the same two parents, and the way that her life has manifested is that she replicated this almost the same exact, like to the T situation that my parents were going through with her children's father. And so she endured the abuse. She endured a crazy mother-in-law, like all these things that my mom did. She went and replicated. And then there's me, who kind of did the complete opposite. You know, I married a white man. I married, you know, I married into somebody who's very like emotional and sensitive and not like abrasive and violent and all these things. And so we are the prime example of that kind of pendulum example that I was giving. And I think that, you know, sometimes it's chance and sometimes it's intention. And so to make sure that these cycles are broken, you have to bring an intention to it. And I think for me, it was chance. Honestly, don't think I was, you know, in my early 20s, like, I'm going to rewrite the story. Like I wasn't conscious then about it. But that's the card that I was dealt, thankfully. And so, yeah, I think with that rewriting of your identity, with knowing and being conscious of the things that have happened in your lineage is so important. So like asking for your aunties and your uncles and your grandparents, if they're still living, like to tell you stories of their childhood is so important, because then you can say like, oh shit, like there is a pattern. Like I remember, you know, and we talked about this in one of our first podcasts together. It's just like this cycle of sexual trauma in my lineage blew my fucking mind, because I was like, multiple aunts, multiple cousins, like all these women in my lineage who have suffered from sexual trauma. And then my grandmother who was born from rape, like all these things. And it's like, wow, like if I hadn't known that, my story wouldn't make as much sense as it is, and my story wouldn't be as powerful as it is, and the responsibility that I feel like I have to heal the entire lineage wouldn't be there. And I think I take it more seriously now, and I'm vocal with it, and I'm public with my story, because I know it's creating that ripple effect in my lineage. And then if somebody else can see it, then they can create that ripple effect in their lineage. And so it's not just about, you know, what happened before us, it's also what's going to happen after we're gone. And so, yeah, these patterns that we have in our lineages are so strong, and when we can acknowledge them and heal from them, it's so phenomenal.
Simone, I just want to thank you for your candor, because these conversations are not easy. And there are times where the guest comes on and they give personal stories. And I know sometimes they can't be something that it just flows off the tongue. And that's why sometimes I'll introduce something and then I'll jump to something else, you know, because I don't want to do anything that's true, even though this is the Trigger One Talk podcast. I'm very conscientious. As I always tell people, it's my podcast, but it's your interview. The method to my madness is sometimes I'll kind of jump around. My ADD kicks in a little bit sometimes too when I'm doing that. And when I'm talking to the guests, a lot of times you all will give me something that I didn't think about either in the pre-interview, if we even did a pre-interview. So to wrap up, before we get into the missing person case, I want to say to you that the life that you're living right now, I want you to continue to look at all of these naysayers and look at all these Karens and Kens and Chads and say, you know what? Why don't you give it a shot? Instead of critiquing, why don't you give it a shot? Just try it. Try it for a day. Try it for a week. Try it for a month. We all got the same 24 hours. If you don't like it, if it doesn't work for you, go back to your status quo. Again, we can have conversations without confrontation, and that's the bottom. Simone, you just are such an inspiration as always. I love you to pieces, and I can't wait to come down to Mexico, because we're going to be coming down there next November. Our oldest daughter's getting married, and so if we're close by, we're going to have to link up. You know, I was trying to get at you while you were here in the States, but, you know, it's okay.
Yes. I would love to meet in person, and yeah, that'd be beautiful. Definitely let me know when the time comes, when you have the location.
You know, I definitely will. And I want to bring on the screen your information here to your social media links. Folks, Simone is not only an applied epigeneticist and behavior analyst, she is an author. A 5-series book set on exploring the elements on Amazon. I'll post a link in the show notes for that. This 5-book series exploring the elements: air, fire, water, earth, and ether. Tell us about that.
Ether, yeah. I love it when kids ask me this, because it's probably the most unknown or mysterious element, and also I think the most important one, the one that started the universe, right? It's ether, it's space, it's the energy, and I think that is where we're headed, right? In our society, we're headed to embracing spirituality and philosophy more. We're headed to healing ourselves with natural means and energetics. And so when I get to talk to kids about ether, it's so amazing. And how their minds, you get to see their wheels are turning. And at the beginning of the book Ether, at the beginning of each book, there's a concept or an idea or an activity. And at the beginning of Ether, they get to experience what it feels like. And it's basically where you rub your hands together really fast, really hard for 10 seconds. And then you slowly move your hands apart. If you're doing this now as you're listening, like, you feel the ether, you feel the energy in between your hands. And that is the best way to explain things to children, mostly, is through their experiences, right? So they experience that energy in their hands before they get started with reading. And then they get to figure out, like, where in their environment is ether? Like, what is ether really about? How does it affect your body? And then at the end of that book, there's a guided meditation for parents to read to their children. So yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I'm getting this series this weekend. You start with air, That's the first book that's the first element that you explore. Then fire, then water, then earth, and then it ends in ether, which is the final element that you explore. Again, this is on Amazon. You can get it in Kindle, you can get it in hardback or paperback. And she also has her social media link, which is Simone Akasha. And I'll post a link to that in the show notes also, where she gives basically a video journal of a day in the life of Simone and her family in Mexico. And some of these situations that come about, whether it's, Kens and Karens, or she'll talk about meditating, she'll talk about food and food intake and homeschooling ideas. And there's just so many different things, just showing the kids playing in the water naturally. Sometimes they're not wearing any clothing, and how culturally it's a lot different than it is here. Simone, we're going to be talking about some of these things as we continue this series, because it's just not enough time. It's just never enough time. But that's okay. We can keep going. Any parting words from you, ma'am?
Man, everybody know that if you have questions on the topic that we talked about today, whether it's pregnancy related or parenting related, my email, my inbox on Instagram is always open. Just slide in the DMs and I'll be happy to connect.
That's amazing. I'm just going to bring this up on the screen real quick so they can see your link tree, because I'll post that on there. For those that don't understand what epigenetics is or behavior analyst is, definitely reach out to Simone. She's a breath of fresh air. She's a wealth of knowledge. And your brother. I always bring on educated Black women because they are the most disrespected people on the planet. I was raised by an educated Black woman who basically taught me everything that I needed to know, and the rest I had to learn on my own through just life experiences and making connections. And one of those connections is my friendship with this wonderful mom and scientist who is my partner. So, Simone, I want to thank you from the bottom of my soul. I love you to life, not to death. I learned that from Professor Griffith. So stop saying that. I love you to life.
I love you to life too.
We're going to go ahead and let you go back to your day. Enjoy the weather down in Mexico. Enjoy the water, the sand, the surf, the sun. And more than anything, enjoy life as you're doing so wonderful. Simone, love for everybody.
Thank you.
For those that don't know, we cover missing person cases at the end of every episode of the Triple One Talk podcast. And those cases, 99% of them are about a melanated man, woman, or child. It could be a runaway, it could be a kidnapping, it can be an abduction. And when we do these conversations about these missing cases, we come from a varying degree of resources. Nameless. There's the FBI's website. We use so many different websites and tools that will highlight these missing person cases. Sometimes we'll do a group of cases. Sometimes it'll be just a true crime story about a missing person case. And so today we're going to talk about this is a story about a 12-year-old young Black girl named Lori Page. She's been missing for over 8 months now. This story comes from a source. That source is called WCTV in Tallahassee.
But first, the clock continues to tick since the 12-year-old Tallahassee girl disappeared. It has now been over 260 days since Lori Page was last seen. Thank you for joining us at 6. I'm Julie Montanaro.
And I'm Jacob Murphy. Today, police and firefighters joining together to search for Lori Page in a Tallahassee park.
Page was reported missing in June of last year. She was last seen June 3rd at Continental Court. A month later, we spoke with police and one of Page's teachers at Griffin Middle School. That investigation continued, but there were no updates. Today, the FBI announcing a $15,000 reward for information in the case. They're also setting up billboards in 3 states. And dozens of people participating in a search earlier in the day for the 12-year-old girl. It is the 5th search so far.
Our Stacey Inez spending much of the day with that search party, speaking with some of the people combing through dozens of acres at San Luis Mission Park. Stacey, what are those efforts looking like?
Julia and Jacob, police and fire were here pretty much all day, searching through every inch of this wooded area here, through the trails and parks. They were combing through every detail, marking anything that they saw. Now, I also spoke with a woman, as you guys mentioned, she's been missing for nearly 8 months. So I spoke with a woman again today who taught Lori Page in school at Griffin Middle. And she says it's really unbelievable that this 12-year-old is still missing. But she also says that is not a reason to give up.
I'm feeling discouraged. Just to not know anything for 8 months feels like too long.
Margaret Summers says the days grow longer knowing that 12-year-old Lori Page is still missing after nearly 8 months.
Every kid matters. And if she just disappeared and nobody knew about it, wouldn't that say she doesn't matter? She does matter. And she's going to continue to matter. And here we are 8 months later. We haven't stopped looking. We're not going to stop looking.
Tuesday, about 90 people between Tallahassee Police and Fire Department searched 64 acres of Mission San Luis Park. TPD says Page was last seen in the general area near Continental Court off Ocala Road.
Our concern grows day by day. We want to be able to bring Lori home and you reunite her with her family and friends. When you have this amount of time that goes by, our concern always increases, but we've really been concerned since day one.
Alicia Hill with the police department says this is their 5th search since Page was originally reported missing last summer.
But the reality is there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, so much investigative work. Even with a minimal digital footprint, we still have to comb through evidence online.
And as the search continues, Summers remembers Page as one of her brightest students.
She was more into school, more so than any other kid that I dealt with. We are supposed to go out of our way to make the kids feel important, but the way she always beelined over to me made me feel important. And I have not forgotten the way that she made me feel.
Now, Summers is also continuing her efforts as well. So this weekend, she'll be attending a community cleanup, and she plans to hand out flyers for Lori Page to anyone who might have seen her. And of course, law enforcement is asking if you know anything to let them know and let them decide how useful that information is. But as we mentioned earlier, the FBI now issuing a $15,000 reward for information leading to her safe return. For now, live in Tallahassee, Stacey Inez, WCTV. Eyewitness News.
All right. Hopefully these combined efforts lead to answers. Stacey, thank you so much.
Lori Page, ladies and gentlemen, the City of Tallahassee Police Department's Facebook page, which is what I'm displaying on the screen right now, they have a missing persons flyer that they posted dated June 3rd, 2023, case number 2023-97239, Lori, spelled Lori, Page, Paige, 12 years old, 5 foot, 120 pounds, black hair, brown eyes. The Tallahassee PD Special Victims Unit is seeking information on the location of 12-year-old Lori Page. Page was last seen on June 3rd, 2023 in the 1200 block of Continental Court. Page is a dark-skinned black female with shoulder-length black dreadlocks. It is unknown what she was last seen wearing, but she may have a multicolored backpack. Anyone with information is asked to call Tallahassee PD at 850-891-4200. Again, anyone with any information about the whereabouts of Lori Page, good, bad, or ugly, is asked to call the Tallahassee PD at 850-891-4200. You can also go to their website, which is talgov, talgov.com/police. The reason we cover these cases again is because we want to bring the same energy and media attention to these missing persons of color. 99% of the cases that we cover are melanated folks, and we want to change that narrative. We want all missing persons to get the same energy and media coverage that we see in mainstream media. We want to see it across all spectrums of media: print, radio, TV, podcasts, social media, whatever forms of media that are available. We want to see those cases publicized. For Simone Nofel and Lori Page's family, I want to give everybody a reminder: live in awareness, never live in fear. Situational awareness is very important. keep your head on the swivel. Please, please, please take a first aid, CPR, AD, stop the bleed class. Go to your local community, get involved in a CERT program, which is a community emergency response team that you can take up a class either with the fire department or the EMS service. You can call your non-emergency phone numbers. A lot of times it's 411 in most communities. Live in awareness, never live in fear. Make sure that you become an immediate responder in case of an emergency, because it's not a matter of if, but when and where an emergency is going to happen. And what are you going to do if you're involved in that situation? You can contact me at consultingsolutions@pentonpending.com for any updates about the podcast. If you want me to come out and speak to your group, your organization, your house of worship, your school, if you want us to do any CPR, first aid, stop the bleed training, we travel across the country doing that type of training, help you out.